What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from ye old Mtg. We like magic, and today we're going to cover a deck you've been asking me for all season. Let's run through Knights. A subtle pun, but it's there. I'll see you on the other side of the intro. Untitled Knights is one of those decks that's kind of difficult to build because there's so many good pieces for it. Usually you have the opposite problem. There's a lot of decks in this format that are tough to find the right build for because you have to search through the chaff and kind of distinguish what's good from what's mediocre or subpar. And doing that with Knights can be as difficult as pulling a sword from a stone, and we've only seen a couple of Abzan Knights lists in the MTGO competitive league results so far. But I've kind of tried to look at what may be the shortcomings of those decks and try to shore some things up, especially in what we know about the format right this second. So this list ended up being a little bit more mid-range than the Knights list that we've seen so far, what limited Knights list that we've seen so far. So with all that said, I think that's a good intro. Gather around the table here, another subtle pun for you, and we'll look at what I've done. Well, let's start with the creatures here, and this might be the first surprise of the video, and that's the fact that the creatures actually start with the 2-drops. We'll talk a little bit more about Dauntless Bodyguard later when we get to the cards I didn't play, and I'll actually give you a whole other list you could play if you wanted to make this deck a little bit more budget. And that deck includes a lot of Dauntless Bodyguards, but in the end, if we're trying to make the most competitive, best deck possible, I felt like there were a couple of problems with Dauntless Bodyguard. You know, we only have 8 untapped white sources available to us on turn 1, and we need at least like 4 more to consistently get Dauntless Bodyguard, and I felt like that was way too few to really rely on this card. And to be honest, I feel crazy saying this, but a 1-mana 2/1 just isn't the most high-impact play in Standard Magic these days anymore. So this could go in a more budget deck, but honestly, I just felt like we could use our slots on better cards. Let's put it that way for now. But again, we'll talk more about Bodyguard later. I just know some people are already smashing dislike, but I want to go ahead and let you know why I didn't end up on it in the competitive list. But in any case, let's move on to the 2-drop creatures, where it's actually where we're going to start our curve in this more mid-rangey of lists here. So let's look at both Knight of Grace and Knight of Malice, because they kind of go hand in hand. Although I think there is a discrepancy in the names of these creatures. You know, Knight of Grace, it's like, oh, he's a good dancer. You know, I want to call him Boogie Knight for that reason. But Knight of Malice, it's like, oh, he's the personification of evil. Like, there's definitely a little bit of an imbalance as far in the nomenclature here. But in any case, Knight of Grace is a ridiculous card in this format right now. Everybody knows it. This just, you know, can't get targeted by all the best removal right now. Vraska's Contempt, Assassin's Trophy, Cast Down, Moment of Craving. This just shrugs off almost everything, and there's a lot of black permanents that people are playing, so this will get a boost even if we don't have a black permanent. But obviously, we got a Knight of Malice out and a Knight of Grace. They work off of each other, which is always sweet, but Knight of Malice is good in its own right nowadays, you know? It's a little bit better in some ways than Knight of Grace, just in a vacuum in this deck, because we've got way more white permanents than black permanents. So probably, you know, in terms of probability, I was going to say probabilistically again. In terms of probability, it's much more likely that Knight of Malice will get the boost than Knight of Grace. But still, you know, Knight of Grace is a ridiculous card. I already pointed that out. But Knight of Malice can get targeted by all the good black removal right now, but it can't be targeted by like Baffling In, Seal Away, Ixalan's Binding, Conclave Tribunal, and all of that's important too. So these are just 2 great creatures in terms of stats and abilities. But once they do get the boosts, they're just unbelievable. These are great creatures, and they get synergy off of all of our different Knight payoffs. Now, our 3-drops in the deck are almost as no-brainer as our 2-drops in a lot of ways, you know. First off, we're going to play 4 whole copies of Knight of Autumn because it's one of the best reasons to even play green in this deck in the first place, you know. So I like this card because in terms of flavor, it's kind of like it reminds me of a paladin. Like, I've never played a day of WoW in my life, but as far as what I know about paladins and, you know, D&D and WoW and stuff, I like that you can either use your, you know, available points to spec into tanking and just make this a big 4/3 body, you know, or you can use your points to teach it, you know, some healing and get you some life back, you know. Or you can use your points to pour those into, you know, some white magic, you know, and destroy an artifact or enchantment. It's already a good enough card by itself, but when you've got, like, History of Benalia in your deck, for instance, then it just gets even better. And History is probably the best reason to play this deck, so we're going to play all 4 copies. Teleporting Cat, but anyway, this is probably one of the best 3-drops in Standard, bar none, anyway, like even if you don't have Knight synergies. So if you do have a bunch of Knight synergies, the card is just absolutely ludicrous. It absolutely is, you know. If we just have like 2 other Knights besides the ones that this has already generated, when Chapter 3 goes off, then that is often game over. Off with their heads at that point. But I've actually slipped in 2 copies of Midnight Reaper here because it's a Knight. And I feel a little weird about playing 10 3-drops, but this is more of a mid-range deck than anything else, so I don't mind it so much because this card is just super powerful. This deck needs a way to draw cards, keep up on cards even when it's losing creatures, and this does exactly that, while providing a good body, and even if it's the, you know, even if it dies and nothing else dies while it's on the battlefield, it'll at least replace itself, you know? It has, again, sort of cross-synergy with Knight of Autumn, because this will deal some damage to you if a couple of your guys die, sure, but Knight of Autumn can help you gain that life back. The one weakness this deck has in some ways is that there's really no good card advantage for it outside of playing a piece like Karn or something, but this helps elegantly solve that problem and still give us a body with the relevant tribal type. In the 4-drop slot, I'm going to run 4 copies of Valiant Knight because this is actually, in some ways, a better Knight payoff than History of Benalia, and it works really well with History. You know, on curve, if you just go History turn 3 into Valiant Knight turn 4, then turn 5 is going to be a serious issue for the opponent if they can't do anything about your, you know, your board state at that point. I mean, we're playing this for the Anthem effect, but the activated ability is ridiculous. The mana sink on this can sometimes just win the game, you know, in these kind of, you know, grindy, you know, board state matters situations that we're seeing a lot of in Standard right now. This is a game-breaking activated ability, so the card does everything we want. Of course I'm going to play a playset of this. Aside from History, this is some of the only Knight payoffs that we really have in this deck, but it is definitely worth it, and it's resistant to Justice Strike. I should work that in here too. This can't be Justice Strike, and that's pretty good. Pretty sweet when your Anthem effect is resistant to one of the most played removal pieces in the format. So, yeah, we're going to play all 4 Valiant Knight. It doesn't look like the most powerful piece in a deck where we're trying to shave bad pieces and play the most powerful pieces possible. But the synergy is just so real and so relevant that we have to play the playset. We're actually not quite done with creatures here because we've got a couple more 4-drops to talk about. I've seen a lot of people play Lyra Dawnbringer as a 2-of in the 5-drop slot in the main deck. We actually consign Lyra to the sideboard in case we run across aggro decks, in which case she is great. But in the main deck, I've used those 2 slots on Shalai Voice of Plenty instead. Now, just like playing Lyra, this gives us a flying creature that's important for a variety of reasons. Plus, this lets us just not care about Settle the Wreckage. Very important if we're trying to go off with Chapter 3 of History on turn 5. You know, this plays on curve with History, so that's really good too, but this gives us yet another game-breaking activated ability. I was playing Flower Flourish in the deck for a good long time, as a 2-of and a 3-of, but I actually ended up cutting them, and I'd still kind of like to play them, but Shalai gives us, you know, the Flourish half of Flower and Flourish on a flying body that also protects us from removal and Settle the Wreckage and stuff, so I think it's just the better call overall. Now, I'm playing 2 copies of Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants in the deck. The only creatures that this can actually get out of the graveyard here are the 2, 2-drop Knights. But we are playing 8 copies of them, and it's very likely that we'll get one not only on the battlefield, but into the graveyard by the time Ajani hits the battlefield. But even if we don't, that's fine. Ajani's plus, ability is perfectly good on its own, just making our creatures outclass our opponents. This is good for breaking board states too. And if you do eventually get to a Johnny's Ultimate, this will, win the game against a lot of decks. It used to be a sort of anti-control Ultimate, but now it's an anti-every mid-range deck in the format Ultimate too, Johnny's just great, even if you're not getting stuff out of your graveyard, but even if, especially if you are, it's a fine card for that too. In a way, this kind of seems like a Golgari Findbroker that can't get everything out of your graveyard, but has way more utility than Findbroker would, and is more castable too, for that matter. So, I like a lot about a Johnny in this deck. Even though we're not playing Dauntless Bodyguard or any other 2-drop Knights, I still think it's very much worth the 2-of. But let's get on to the spells here, and I don't really have much to say, even though we have a relatively, wide and varied spell suite. We're going to start with 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy, because this is one of the best reasons to play black in the deck, aside from Knight of Malice, obviously. But if we're playing black and green in the same deck, I think we can make a couple of slots for Assassin's Trophy. I don't think I really have to explain why this card's in the deck too much. Just best removal piece in Standard. We'll play a couple of copies for just getting rid of anything. Literally anything. But Conclave Tribunal can do that too. At sometimes the same rate, depending on what our board state is like. So I wanted to play a few copies of Tribunal as well, because along with Trophy, Getting to play both of these cards, in the same deck actually gives us a huge amount of just catch-all answers that can get literally anything off the table. But I've slipped a removal piece into the main deck that you don't often see in these Knight decks, and this is actually one of the pieces that establishes this as more of a mid-range deck than an aggro deck, but I'm playing 3 copies of Baffling End in my list. From Steel Leaf Champion to Goblin Chain Whirler to Runaway Steamkin to Wild Growth Walker to Jade Light Ranger to Merfolk Branch Walker, there's just so many cards that Baffling End answers right now. So many that I ran out of breath at the end of that and probably had a few more cards I could name. Knight of Grace, a good example. Adonto Vanguard, good example. There's just no end to the amount of early game creatures that this covers right now. I also think that if we're trying to play, the traditional 11 2-drops to make sure that we can actually get something by turn 2, then this is a better, 3 of than just about any Knight that we have access to. I really do like Cavalry Drill Master. I actually do, but we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to the cards I didn't play section. As it is, I think Baffling End is just, man, you are shedding. I don't know if you guys saw the hair just fly up. I'm not sure if the camera caught that, but hair went everywhere because my buddy is shedding. He's still down here, by the way. I'm not petting Air. He's sleepy. But in any case, again, just to reiterate, I think this is just better than any of the Knights we could play in the 2-drop slot that we're not already playing. So in order to make this a more mid-range deck and be well-equipped to deal with what's happening in the early game in this format, I think Baffling End is a must. But to finish off the main deck, we're playing a couple of copies of Find Finality, taking a page out of Green Black's book because this card is just crazy. The Find half is great. Along with Ajani, we have lots of ways in this deck of getting Knights back even after they die. That is really important, not only against Control, which plays, obviously, a lot of removal. Bye, Ziggy. I woke him up, and that's my fault. But in any case, not only against Control, but, Green Black and the Red-White mid-range decks, all of them play a wide suite of removal. So, having something like Find Finality and Ajani in the main deck just gives us an amount of resiliency you don't usually see in these Knights lists. Of course, Finality is a good card too. We can make Shalai or Valiant Knight survive a Finality, and sometimes that can be lights out by itself. But if we've spent a couple of turns with Ajani putting counters on stuff, then sometimes like 3 or 4 of our guys can survive a Finality, or maybe we've got multiple Valiant Knights out and we play Finality. In those cases, we can sometimes make a whole board full of creatures survive, and then it's just game. Now here's the mana base, and it's honestly pretty cut and dried. A lot of people have been asking me what the mana base specifically for this deck is going to look like. I wouldn't mind 25 lands in the deck, but we're playing 24 because I'm a little bit scared of Flood, and we don't have all the ways to draw cards so we can hit land pockets, and it just ruins our day. So I want to trim the mana base down just a little bit, and I think that we can easily use this. It hasn't presented too many problems, and in fact, this is the same mana base that most of these Knights decks are using right now. But here's the sideboard for the deck, and oh my god, there's prices. Look at that, you guys. You've been asking me for that for a while. Here's prices for cards in the sideboard. Anyway, this is a fairly simple sideboard, to be honest. Duress is in there against the Control matchup. That's an important card. Don't have to tell you. Argel's Bloodfast, that is a way to draw cards in slower, grindier, or Control matchups. I trust this way more in Control matchups than I do in matchups like Green-Black, but still, in matchups like Green-Black, we get it flipped over. This can actually be really, really good, and it works well with our recursive elements. So I do like that about it, but mostly it's for to draw cards against Control decks. Now, there's a couple of weird-looking things in here, like Tocatli Honor Guard, to be specific. If you're not in on the current tech, this is mostly in a lot of, white sideboards against the Green-Black decks, because the Green-Black decks rely on a lot of, enter the battlefield triggers for their creatures to really get value. Without those ETB triggers, it's just a bunch of, vanilla garbage creatures that have, terrible stats for the mana cost. A bunch of 4-mana 2/2s and stuff. 4-mana 3/4. It's just not anywhere near as good. So, Honor Guard is actually great if you can get it out against those decks. And there's a reason why the card is spiked from 15 cents to 75 whole cents in the last week here. That's because it is currently the going tech in the sideboard against those decks. But so is Remorseful Cleric to help, wipe their board. And it's also cool that not only this, but Honor Guard work well with Ajani. If they do kill either of these creatures, we can just get them right back. And we've got Find Finality to make that work too. So Remorseful Cleric can sometimes go off more than once in the same game against these Green-Black decks. There's also Cleansing Nova, just so we have a good mid-range piece to clear the board. Got a lot of recursive elements, and in some cases, we don't even have to start doing stuff until after we Cleansing Nova. We've got Assassin's Trophy, Baffling End, Conclave Tribunal. We've got lots of ways to, control the game until we can Cleansing Nova and start turning the corner. But we can also just Cleansing Nova and then a Johnny or Find Finality our own stuff back. So this is a great card in this deck for clearing up aggro and mid-range matches because we can get right back on board. It's not a problem. Now, this is the section where I usually discuss stuff I didn't play and what are some possibilities for this deck and all that. But in this case, I'm just going to give you a whole other list that you could play that's a lot more budget than this. It's not necessarily a budget deck, but it is half the price that this deck is, and it's just green-white Knights. It's a fine deck right now, We do play Dauntless Bodyguard here. We do play Cavalry Drill Master here. It's a lot more aggro, a little bit lower to the ground, but we still have Conclave Tribunal, Baffling End, they're good. Removal elements, and we still get to play a Johnny in the deck, which actually has way more play because we have Dauntless Bodyguard and Cavalry Drill Master. And Cavalry Drill Master is like getting to play a spell whenever we bring it back with a Johnny. I actually really like Cavalry Drill Master, just for the record. You get Conclave Cavalier in the 4-drop slot, which is also a good-looking card to me. So I like a good bit about the green-white list. If you wanted to build that, it's a fine, not necessarily budget, but much more budget option. But here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 67, which is a pretty high score, but you'll note all the 7s in the deck. The deck doesn't do a lot of stuff like mediocrely, but is that a word? I don't know. I keep making words up. In any case, the deck does a lot of stuff, above average, but not really, really well. It grazes the rim, but it can't quite dunk on that 8 in a lot of categories, and it's probably all that armor weighing them down. And the deck does have a lot of power. I'll reiterate, one of the main goals of building the deck was to try to trim all the, less powerful cards from the deck. We still ended up playing Valiant Knight, but we dropped a couple of cards that were not quite as powerful. Dauntless Bodyguard, specifically. But there were a couple of other pieces that I've seen in this deck that just weren't quite the power level that the deck needs to, I think, fully succeed. So what we ended up was just, I guess, pumping money into the deck is one way you could put it. But again, we're trying to build the most competitive deck possible. So give this thing a shot because it definitely plays, a lot of the best cards in the format. If you took out Valiant Knight from the equation, which again, the synergy for the deck is obviously worth it. But if you took Valiant Knight out of the equation, almost every card in the deck is one of the best cards in Standard, like in the top 25 or 30 cards in the whole format. So this is a very powerful deck, no doubt. So give this thing a shot, take it up to F&M, take it up to F&M. It's a tough thing to say at speed, and give it a shot, see how you do. And if you're interested in doing just that, then click the first link in the description down there, and that'll take you over to the deck list on TCG Player. They help sponsor my content, full disclosure, all that, but they are the cheapest place you're going to get this deck online, and it is fairly expensive to buy this freaking thing. Again, it's got really, really good cards in it. It's like, if you have to play 4 History of Benalia anyway, then what's the point in trying to make the deck budget at that point, You could make a more budget deck, but if we got to play 4 copies of History, we just got to go all the way anyway, I think. So with that in mind, yeah, the deck is a pretty penny, but this is the cheapest place you're going to find it. A lot of places, the deck is well over $400. So if you're going to get it from anywhere, get it from these guys. But anyway, pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one, so let me know how you felt about Abzan Knights down there in the comments section. This is the best version I could come up with, but who knows? Maybe I missed something insane that absolutely has to be in here. You never know. I make mistakes. I'm a person, so let me know down there in the comments section how you felt about it and all my different justifications for what I did or did not play. But in any case, with that, just do all the YouTube stuff, like the videos, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. There's a lot more deck techs to cover, like a lot this season, so do that. And, hit the Patreon up if you want to vote for what decks you want to see next. I'm doing 2 or 3 polls a week at this point. And there's going to be another poll up in just a couple of days. So throw me $1 a month and you can vote on what decks you want to appear on the channel. Well, not a bad deal. So get over there. I'll leave a link in the description for you. And with that, I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Good night, y'all. That's the last joke. Just had to get one more in there. Anyway, but do the love and the kindness. Do it.